Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get. Forrest Gump wasn't just a heartwarming tale of an everyman stumbling through history. It was a chaotic, unpredictable experiment in movie-making, one that fused groundbreaking technology with old-school improvisation. Behind the camera, there were battles with weather, budget nightmares, actors getting injured, and risks that could have derailed the entire film. From bizarre on-set decisions to technical wizardry that stunned Hollywood, this production was anything but smooth. In fact, the journey of bringing Forrest Gump to life is almost as unbelievable as the story itself. So today, we're diving into 15 weird facts about Forrest Gump, 1994. Stories of lost tempers, dangerous stunts, creative clashes, and moments that almost changed film history. And stick around until the end, because the bonus fact might just make you see this beloved classic in a completely different light. Let's run through them one by one. Tom Hanks refused a salary and struck gold. When Tom Hanks agreed to play Forrest, he wasn't exactly sure if the film would succeed. The studio wanted to cut costs, so instead of his usual $20 million paycheck, Hanks made a bold move. He waived his salary in exchange for a percentage of the box office gross. At the time, it was a gamble. What if the movie failed? But it didn't. Forrest Gump became a cultural phenomenon, grossing over $678 million worldwide. That percentage deal ended up being one of the smartest financial moves in film history. Reports suggest Hanks walked away with nearly $65 million, far beyond what he would have earned with a flat salary. It wasn't just about money, though. Hanks later admitted he believed in the film's story and wanted to see it succeed. His decision mirrored Forrest himself, taking a leap into the unknown, trusting fate. And just like Forrest's cross-country run, Hanks's choice paid off in ways no one could have predicted. The Vietnam scenes were shot in the U.S. The lush, swampy battlefields of Vietnam in Forrest Gump looked convincing, but they were nowhere near Southeast Asia. Instead, they were filmed in South Carolina. Specifically, the production used Fripp Island and Hunting Island State Park, transforming them with clever set design and digital effects. Director Robert Zemeckis relied heavily on cinematographer Don Burgess to make the flat marshlands look like dense jungles. Palm trees were flown in, artificial foliage was added, and the haze of smoke machines completed the illusion. Even more shocking, much of the terrain was digitally enhanced, a technique that was still considered experimental in the early 90s. What audiences didn't know is that these war zones were crawling with mosquitoes, brutal humidity, and unpredictable weather. Crew members often worked drenched in sweat, struggling to keep cameras running in damp conditions. Not Vietnam, but Carolina swamps. Not real. Jungles, but fabricated landscapes. Yet somehow, the illusion held, and those battle scenes became some of the most memorable in the entire film. The ping-pong matches were CGI. When Forrest suddenly becomes a world champion ping-pong player, the sequences look stunningly real. But here's the trick. Tom Hanks wasn't actually playing. The balls in every match were completely computer-generated. Hanks and his opponents simply mimed the game, rehearsing specific paddle movements with nothing in the air. Then, ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, animated the balls later, matching the physics of every swing. In 1994, this was groundbreaking. Digital effects were mostly used for dinosaurs or explosions, not tiny white balls bouncing across a table. It required frame-by-frame adjustments to make the action seamless. Even professional players were fooled, believing Hanks had developed lightning-fast reflexes. Hanks himself joked that the hardest part was pretending to be good without actually being good. Not a sport, but a digital illusion, not raw skill, but choreography. Still, the sequence remains one of the most convincing blends of acting and CGI of its era. The bench scenes nearly didn't happen. For millions, Forrest Gump sitting on a savannah bench with a box of chocolates is the film's most iconic image. But here's the strange twist. Those scenes were almost cut entirely. Paramount executives worried that the bench sequences slowed down the film. Too much talking, not enough action. The studio wanted Zemeckis to minimize them, fearing audiences would grow restless. But Hanks and Zemeckis fought back. They argued the bench wasn't filler, it was the heart of the movie. The fight got heated. At one point, executives suggested trimming the dialogue to just "life is like a box of chocolates." But Zemeckis refused, insisting the bench framed the entire narrative. He knew these quiet monologues grounded Forrest's journey and gave the film its reflective rhythm. In the end, the filmmakers won. Not just a storytelling device, but a cultural landmark. Today, that bench isn't just a prop. It's displayed in a museum, visited by fans from all over the world. Robin Wright, filmed while seriously ill. Jenny's tragic storyline mirrored real-life pain for actress Robin Wright. During filming, Wright contracted a severe case of pneumonia. Production schedules were brutal, and many of her scenes, including emotional ones like singing "Blowin' in the Wind" at the nightclub, were shot while she was visibly sick. She later revealed that she pushed through fevers and exhaustion, determined not to delay the film. Zemeckis offered to reschedule, but Wright insisted on continuing. The strain shows in her performance, not as weakness, but as raw authenticity. Jenny's fragility, her worn-down demeanor, feels painfully real because in many ways it was. Not just acting, but surviving. Not just portraying suffering, but embodying it. Wright's commitment gave Jenny's character a haunting resonance. Behind the camera, the crew worried constantly about her health, but on screen, those moments became unforgettable. The brutal football scenes were real hits. Forrest's sudden rise as a college football star is one of the film's funniest moments, but it wasn't all comedy behind the scenes. Those bone-crunching tackles you see, they weren't staged with safety rigs. The production used real college athletes as extras, and many of the collisions were full force. Tom Hanks admitted he took more than a few bruises while running plays on the field. "Those guys didn't hold back," he recalled. The director wanted authenticity, and the athletes were told to hit hard, even if it meant Hanks risked getting flattened. To heighten realism, multiple cameras captured the tackles from different angles, making it impossible for Hanks to fake the running sequences. The crew would shout again, and he'd line up for another punishing sprint. Not stage combat, but raw athletic violence. Not a stunt double, but Hanks himself taking the hits. Audiences laughed at Forrest bulldozing defenders, but behind the camera, those scenes were closer to organized chaos. In the end, it added to the mythic quality of Forrest's character, unstoppable, resilient, always pushing forward no matter what slammed into him. Haley Joel Osment's breakout cameo. The final moments of Forrest Gump are heartbreaking. Forrest discovering he has a son. The little boy, played by Haley Joel Osment, was just 5 years old at the time, and this was his very first film role. Casting directors almost passed on him, fearing he was too inexperienced. But Osment stunned everyone in auditions with his natural sincerity. Tom Hanks later said, "He didn't act like a kid trying to act. He just was." What audiences didn't know was how much weight rested on Osment's small shoulders. Those scenes had to work emotionally, or the entire ending would collapse. Zemeckis kept the set calm and quiet, protecting Osment from the chaos of Hollywood. It worked. The child's wide-eyed innocence brought the film full circle, showing Forrest's legacy continuing, not just a cameo, but the launch of a career. After Forrest Gump, Osment became one of the most famous child actors of the 90s, eventually starring in The Sixth Sense. The little boy on the bus bench didn't just give Forrest hope, he carved his own place in movie history. Hurricane season nearly shut down production. The hurricane scenes that wipe out Lieutenant Dan's shrimping competition look terrifying. But here's the shocking part. Much of the destruction wasn't manufactured. It came from real storms. Filming along the South Carolina coast put the crew directly in the path of hurricane season. While the production had giant wave machines and wind rigs ready, nature decided to help out. During shooting, actual tropical storms rolled through, battering equipment and soaking sets. The chaos was so intense that the crew feared they might lose boats entirely. At one point, Zemeckis shut down production for safety, worried that lightning would hit exposed cranes. When cameras rolled again, the storm damage was folded into the sequence, blending real weather with special effects. Not just simulated fury, but Mother Nature herself raging on cue. The risk was enormous, millions in equipment at stake, cast and crew dodging debris. Yet the results were breathtaking. The storm wasn't just spectacle. It became a turning point in Forrest's journey, symbolizing both survival and renewal. Gary Sinise's transformation into Lieutenant Dan. Lieutenant Dan's story arc, losing his legs in Vietnam, spiraling into despair, then finding redemption, was one of the most powerful in the film. But the way Gary Sinise brought him to life bordered on revolutionary. To portray Dan as a double amputee, Sinise wore blue fabric sleeves over his legs. Industrial light and magic then digitally erased them frame by frame. This technique was groundbreaking at the time, requiring unprecedented precision in visual effects. But it wasn't just the technical challenge. Sinise immersed himself in the role by working closely with disabled veterans, studying their movements, frustrations, and resilience. His performance was so authentic that many viewers assumed he was actually a real amputee. What audiences didn't know is how difficult those shoots were, crawling on the ground, hauling himself into wheelchairs, balancing in unnatural positions. Sinise endured constant physical strain, not just an effect, but a lived embodiment of pain, not just acting, but honoring veterans with truth. The result was unforgettable. Lieutenant Dan didn't just steal scenes, he became one of the most inspiring characters in modern cinema. The cross-country run was a nightmare to film. Forrest's long-distance run across America became a cultural touchstone, but filming it was grueling, expensive, and nearly scrapped from the script. Tom Hanks trained extensively for the sequences, but the real difficulty was logistics. The crew had to shoot in over 20 different U.S. locations, moving equipment across deserts, mountains, and highways. Each setup required road closures, permits, and hours of waiting for perfect light. Hanks admitted he was constantly sore, running mile after mile in costume. To keep continuity, he had to grow out his beard and hair naturally, forcing production to adjust schedules around his appearance. Extras were bussed in for crowd scenes, standing in brutal heat while Hanks jogged past. At one point, budget concerns almost killed the sequence. Paramount executives balked at the cost of filming so many locations. But Zemeckis fought to keep it, arguing the run was essential to Forrest's transformation. It wasn't just a montage, it was an odyssey, and it became one of the most quoted, parodied, and beloved stretches in movie history. Paramount almost killed the film mid-shoot. Forrest Gump looks like a polished masterpiece now, but in 1993 it was teetering on collapse. Paramount executives were deeply uneasy about the ballooning budget. When the cross-country run and elaborate special effects piled on costs, the studio threatened to pull the plug. Robert Zemeckis and Tom Hanks refused to back down. In a stunning move, they both agreed to pay for some of the production costs out of their own pockets, millions of dollars, just to keep the film alive. Hanks later admitted, "Bob and I just said, we'll cover it. We'll give you the money back if it works." Not just an artistic gamble, but financial Russian roulette. If the movie had failed, Hanks and Zemeckis could have lost fortunes. Instead, the investment paid off tenfold. Their decision not only saved Forrest Gump, but also cemented it as a cultural touchstone. The film wasn't just funded by Hollywood, it was rescued by its own creators, who refused to let it die. That passion, that stubborn belief, is part of why the story still resonates today. Sally Field played Tom Hanks's mother, despite the age gap. One of the strangest casting decisions was Sally Field as Forrest's mother. At the time of filming, Field was just 48 years old, only 10 years older than Tom Hanks. To make the illusion work, the makeup team went to extremes. Field endured hours of prosthetics, wigs, and aging techniques to transform her into an older Southern matriarch. But the bigger challenge was emotional. Field had to play maternal authority to an actor who was essentially her peer and someone she had once played opposite as a love interest in Punchline, 1988. Audiences never noticed the odd casting math. On screen, she exuded warmth, toughness, and Southern wisdom. Behind the scenes, though, the crew often joked about the surreal age difference. Not a generational gap, but Hollywood magic. Not biology, but storytelling sleight of hand. Field's performance anchored the film with heart. She wasn't just playing Forrest's mother. She embodied the resilience of an era, making audiences believe in the unstoppable love between parent and child. The Washington Monument scene was chaos. The rally scene at the National Mall, Forrest accidentally speaking at a Vietnam protest, is one of the film's most powerful moments. But behind the camera, it was a logistical nightmare. Over 1,500 extras gathered near the Washington Monument in the sweltering heat. Sound equipment malfunctioned, so Tom Hanks had to shout his speech lines repeatedly. But here's the kicker. Almost nobody heard what he actually said. The speakers failed, and even the extras closest to the stage were left confused. What audiences didn't know is that Forrest's speech was later dubbed in post-production, and most of it is drowned out in the film anyway. Zemeckis made it almost inaudible on purpose, turning the scene into a commentary about silenced voices during the Vietnam era. Not a rally, but controlled mayhem. Not a polished event, but sweaty, chaotic improvisation. Yet the emotion was real. When Forrest reunites with Jenny in the reflecting pool, the extras erupted in genuine applause, relieved to be part of something bigger than just another day's work. The shrimp boat really sank. The shrimping scenes with Forrest and Lieutenant Dan weren't just shot on some Hollywood backlot. They used a real working shrimp boat, one that didn't always cooperate. During filming, the vessel was battered by storms, plagued by engine trouble, and at one point actually sank in shallow water. The crew scrambled to salvage cameras and props, and shooting was delayed for days while the boat was repaired. Zemeckis insisted on using practical locations rather than studio tanks, believing authenticity would elevate the story. That decision nearly derailed the shrimping sequences entirely. Crew members joked that the boat had cursed the production, and Sinise later said filming on it felt like living in a wet coffin. Not a polished prop, but a fragile reality. Not staged disaster, but real breakdown. Yet that struggle gave the shrimping scenes their grit, their sweat, their texture. When Forrest and Dan finally haul in a miraculous catch, it feels earned, because off-screen the crew had fought their own battles with the sea. Elvis Presley's scene almost didn't happen. One of the funniest Easter eggs in Forrest Gump is young Forrest teaching Elvis Presley his iconic dance moves. But getting Elvis into the film was far more complicated than it looks. The production had to negotiate with the Presley estate for likeness rights, a notoriously difficult process. Paramount feared the deal would fall through, forcing the script to drop the entire subplot. For weeks, Zemeckis kept a backup plan in case Elvis couldn't appear. Even after the rights were cleared, finding the perfect Elvis impersonator was a struggle. Dozens of actors auditioned, but only one captured the voice and swagger convincingly enough for the scene. On set, child actor Michael Connor Humphreys, young Forrest, improvised his stiff-legged walk, which unexpectedly mirrored Presley's famous hip-shaking style. Not just a cute cameo, but a legal and creative tightrope. The scene nearly vanished, but instead it became one of the most quoted and replayed moments of the movie. A cultural giant and a fictional child crossing paths in a moment of cinematic magic. Here's the shocker. One of the most quoted lines in movie history, "My name's Forrest Gump. People call me Forrest Gump," wasn't in the script. Tom Hanks improvised it on the spot during the bench scenes. Zemeckis loved it so much that he kept it, and it instantly became Forrest's defining introduction. Not crafted by writers, but born from a fleeting instinct. That unscripted moment is now etched into cinematic history.